have a transcript somehow on Zoom. It's a different camera.
Yeah, just saying, your mum held on to a story for so many years and then told you when you're in your 50s.
Yes, I was already a social worker by then.
Yes.
It was prompted by me talking about doing child protection work. And she said something that it sounded as if she had personal experience. I said, you sound as though you have personal experience. And my newfound relational competence in the family. And she said, yes. And she went on to tell me how she'd been abused. I mean, I was a bit shocked, rigid. My two brothers were there as well. And they said nothing. Yes, and I think I went on to say that she'd always, I think that's why she always had a sense of skepticism about authority. Presumably skepticism about her parents' ability to protect. It may be what made her very protective to the point of intrusiveness with me. And her protective intrusiveness may have been part of what generated some resistance in me.
Yeah. How did learning that story change things for you?
It made me realize how tough and brave she'd been. And there are other stories about her toughness and braveness when she was in the Navy and at other times, and did explain why she was sometimes so preoccupied with, she got muddled with what was her life and what was mine. Apart from that, it made me all the more determined to hold in mind acts of resistance, value them, and to know that arguing back and not doing what you're told can often be a good thing. But also, if you're going to do that, you've got to do it in a way that doesn't get you into deep trouble. You've got to be clever. Somebody once said, don't get mad, get even. And I think it wasn't exactly that, but yes, I learned, I suppose, to be more strategic with my anger. Not just hopelessly complaining, but I think so. I mean, that was the question, when did it first enter? When did it leave is the question, or has it left?
Has it left?
Then it hasn't left, of course. So, I mean, was that enough of the question, answering the question? Did it bring forth what you were hoping?
Yes, and hearing when you're talking about experiences of feeling powerless, with kind of the boarding school and the head teacher and the bullying, and sort of there being very little that you felt in control of there, compared to points where you felt able to make decisions. Actually, I'm going to be a social worker. I'm not going to continue on this path that's been chosen for me. I want something different. And what that opened up then, you said, relational confidence enabled you to ask some questions or spot something that your mum was trying to communicate.
Yeah, I was more curious.
Yeah.
I used to find it very difficult to ask people personal questions. And certainly the families that when I was doing my training in family therapy, with Susan Lang in particular, she commented, and we looked, and there was another trainee on in the same year in the same group as me. You both had difficulty asking personal questions because we thought it was rude. What worked for me was when she said, it's really disrespectful not to ask people about themselves. If you're not interested in them, that is really disrespecting them. It's respectful to ask.
That's quite a reframe.
It's a brilliant reframe, and of course it made absolute sense to me. Okay, it's hard to know how to ask and then in a respectful way. But I discovered that I'd always had a way of saying things, asking questions that didn't seem to cause offence. I don't know how, but it seemed to come easy. Even about tricky things like gender, race, and what have you. And I found myself able to ask without somebody feeling that I was being intrusive, I suppose.
And if you could explain what it is about the way that you ask questions that's meant it hasn't caused that offence, or it's, it seemed to land okay.
I think my curiosity comes not out of a position of curiosity, but out of a genuinely wanting to know, because I don't and I'm interested. So I think it comes across as genuine because it is. I'm very unhappy with taking a not knowing position. I'm much more comfortable with just not knowing. And I think by taking a position, you're sort of pretending. And actually, you just don't ever know anyway, even when you think you know. So if you think of taking a not knowing position, maybe you just need to be honest with yourself and say, I just don't really know. Perhaps I ought to ask, rather than thinking I know the answer. Right? And not knowing position is a dangerous and tricky thing. Whereas not knowing is great. He said in a very knowing way. Now I think there are things one ought to know. There is a sort of, someone's alerted you to a problem or an area of difficulty. And you haven't taken the trouble to find out about it a bit. Then that's what I would call culpable ignorance. Which I'm learning more about all the time. People whose training might involve curiosity and have areas where they're not confident, not curious, despite it having already been problematic. That I think there's a bit of blame comes in for me. I'm not an entirely non-blaming person. Blaming is not very helpful.
It sounds like to me, and you can correct me if I've not understood it correctly, but it sounds like you're talking about it being reasonable to have some expectations.
Absolutely.
Especially of people in positions where they're asking questions.
I think that people of power, people in positions of power, have a higher responsibility for the relationship than people with lower power. I think power goes with responsibility, and vice versa. So you've actually got people in positions of power and authority have to look to their power. They're using it wisely, elegantly, to help with liberation, rather than to oppress. Is that my phone or yours?
It wasn't mine.
There was something with making. I put in my phone's reach for charge. So sorry about the noise.
Don't worry.
You edit that out probably.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think because I'd experienced all that oppression in childhood, that I feel very strongly about that the people in positions of power have responsibility to use it wisely and elegantly.
Yeah.
But also you can't not use it, just as you cannot not communicate.
Yeah.
That by not communicating, you are communicating something.
Mm,
Similarly, you cannot not have power.
mhm,
The power cannot be absent from anything.
mhm.
When you are interviewing me,
Yeah.
I have the power of having my voice and saying what I think, and you are empowering.
Mhm,
You're giving me the power. And one of the things that, I mean, if I have my power taken away in an unkind or unhelpful way,
mhm.
I've now learned how to assert it.
Yeah.
But I'm entitled to use power
Mhm.
because it's always there.
Yeah.
You have to make a decision as to how you use it and what you use it to do.
And within practice, so
In practice.
you have these. You talked a bit about beliefs or understanding of power as ever present, always in the relationship in some way. How do those beliefs affect what you do in practice?
Well, it's interesting because if this discussion is slightly mirroring my therapy practice, because you're, in a sense, asking me for my wisdom, my first thing is not to be seduced into thinking that I've got it or that I can deliver it on tap. But it'll be something that is constructed between us. And if you're saying that it's constructed between us, that feels a lot safer for me than something that I have and you haven't.
Yeah.
But I want, when I'm working with my clients, just as and as much when I'm working with students, I want the students to develop their own sense of power and authority and knowledge so that they can be strong in support of the weak. So it's a sort of handing on the baton in a way of resistance. And I know I've brought family therapy into it, but it came relatively late in my stories of resistance. So direct confrontation has never seemed to me a very good way of doing resistance.
What do you mean by good?
Effective way of changing the power discourse from one of oppression to one of collaboration. When I was doing my social work training, I went to work on a residential farm for 6 weeks for institutionalized ex-prisoners. A sort of funny farm, really. We had herds of goats. We had plants to grow and all sorts of things. I remember going to Broadmoor with the head of the organization to interview a guy who was an arsonist. This was in the summer of 1976, which was absolutely scorching hot. And in the Surrey heathland, which was absolutely bone dry, we had an arsonist come and join us. And the head of the organization put him in charge of burning the rubbish. Because if he was in charge of it, he was also responsible for it, overtly responsible, and would have to stay in control of it. And this was a useful metaphor for him, a life metaphor. And while I was there, there was this huge bear-like man of no intelligence who had served many sentences for car theft. Because he was so big and strong, he could break the handles off car doors and gain entry. So it was very useful for car thieves to use as the muscle. But he wasn't very bright in getting caught. There was another woman who was not very bright, or maybe it was right enough, because when she was in her last offence, had been to steal 2 Christmas trees from the steps of a police station. And so she spent Christmas in prison, maybe what she wanted. But anyway, she'd come from Holloway. And the bear-like bloke was easily provoked because he wasn't very bright and sort of knew it and felt a bit defensive. And she was extraordinarily provocative. And I remember being on duty one weekend, when I was the only member of staff of these 15 ex-offenders. And she goaded him until he got really enraged, and she disappeared out through the ground floor window, with him trying to chase after her with a pickaxe handle, because it was a farm. There were pickaxe handles about, because there were pickaxes. And I was left trying to manage this situation. It was very formative. A giant, enraged, low intelligent, with a murderous intent and a pickaxe handle, and me. He couldn't make it out through the window because he was a giant. And I decided that we would go and look for this woman together, he and I. And we went into the woods. He beat around the bush, literally. We went across the meadows. We went down to the lake. We did it quite noisily. So if she had been around, she would have known that it wasn't very safe for Pierre. And of course, we talked, and he calmed down, and we went to have a cup of tea. We talked about when she comes back in. And he didn't really need to get that wound up. In any case, it was all over now. She came back in a bit nervous, and he was calm. And that was years before I had read J. Haley's The Power Tactics of Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, if someone asks you to go a mile with them, go with them 2. And as with this bloke, he always wanted me to be with him. And I went with him. It must have been nearly 2 miles. And it changed it. And I guess that was probably very systemic, even though at that time I didn't know it. To be with him, but to shape where we went. And I didn't want to have my head beaten in with a pickaxe handle either. I was thinking on your feet like you do when you're a good family therapist. And I think I've learned an awful lot of these things. The rules, sort of internalized rules. And I think a number of people, I remember David Campbell, I don't know if he ever talked about the internalized rules, but he always was appreciative of people, even when they were doing things that were hard to appreciate. And I think I learned to appreciate before appreciative inquiry hit the shelves of bookshelves, bookstores. And of course, I could appreciate violent revolution. I'd rather it weren't violent. But I have to remember these were the days of apartheid when I started out. These were the Shopville massacre.
And I've heard you use the word strategic or sort of effective, so it's not, you can appreciate their place, but you have been looking for what's going to be the most effective strategy.
And you have to think, there's intentionality in that. And there's always a struggle within therapy about the degree of intentionality. Because the moment you set up a therapy relationship, the intention has to be helpful in some way, or you're not going to do it. What is helpful is the unknown.
Yes.
You want that other person to find helpful,
Yeah.
what you can got that will be helpful. And that is an interesting exploration. It doesn't always work.
But there's always something about power in that.
There's power in that, and power that has to be negotiated from the outset. I was rewind. Starting when I qualified as a social worker, I was terrified of, and I'm most terrified of adolescents. And that was why I went to work in a children's home. I thought if I can hack the thing I'm most terrified of, I can become a social worker. And I managed it.
Yeah.
Actually, it worked quite well for me. I was glad to be out of it. I was exhausted and burnt out. It was tough.
Yeah.
There's a tough kids taking a lot of drugs and glue, and kids who've been abused. They need the kids, the assessment centre that sent kids to us. And an officer in charge who let the deputy run things, and the deputy was a assistant paedophile. And so we took the kids who'd all come through that system. We didn't know at the time, but I had to support a couple of the lads in going to court. Yeah. Afterwards, and an interesting position because I was at that point the deputy officer in charge of the other one. And they'd come too. But they were able to talk about that. And we were able to get the other deputy and the officer in charge who was neglectful. Yeah. Was, yeah. You know, about culpable ignorance. Yeah. Yeah. She didn't want to know why this guy had got these kids going out in the minibus with him all the time. Because he kept things under control. That was culpable ignorance. Yeah.
And what did you learn from those lads that you supported through court about resistance?
There's a sense of dignity in resistance. But it's very difficult to overcome fear. I think I learned about fear and the language of fear and how to bring it into the present, and how to turn it into the language of overcoming fear, which is resistance, but not blindly hitting out. But using fear and using anger as a resource. That's what I've learned most of all. I think all the way through my career since then, thought of anger as a resource, a powerful resource, a well of power that has to be used in a constructive or in a safe way, a way that doesn't get the angry person more hurt. And ideally doesn't oppress others. That's one of my worries about oppressors, about the oppressed turning into oppressors. Wherever that happens, whether it's the red wall turning against migrants, whether it's regimes that have grown out of resistance, turning into oppressive regimes, whether that's in post-revolutionary Russia or Central America, or Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, and so on. so actually the morality of using anger as a means of healing. That's hard going.
Yeah.
But you have to value anger. You have to get people to value. You have to value your own anger, and other people have to learn to value theirs, to have theirs valued.
Yeah. And how do you do that?
Ask about it.
Mm-hmm.
Be interested why people use it in one way or another. Do they choose to use it? Do they try to suppress it?
Mm-hmm.
If they suppress it, where does it come out?
Mm-hmm.
Does it come out in it? Is it more helpful to hide it? Do you even see it's there anymore if you've hidden it for long enough? Because I hid my childhood anger.
Yeah.
My first argument with my parents was when I was 26. And even then, my father said, "How dare you speak to your mother like that?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "It's about time somebody did."
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of went quiet. They couldn't find a way past that. But to have your first adolescent rebellion at 26, a bit late, really.
By some people's standards.
Yes.
Maybe
Well, others, maybe it's very early. And they never do it. And it's a long struggle. It's a struggle I still have with authority.
Mm-hmm.
Is to find a way of having a direct challenge to abusive authority. I feel as if the heavens are going to open and I'm going to be swallowed up, or a lightning bolt from God or Zeus or somebody.
Yeah.
You're going to go, gotcha.
Yeah. Sounds like that, 7-year-old boy boarding and being bullied, who knew not to try and challenge because that would have been unsafe.
Yes.
Sounds like he's still
there. He's still there.
there.
He's 77. He's still there.
Still holding on.
But I've now been reassured before. But also other people have reassured me. I've had some arguments with Alf. And every time I get into a meeting where the different views are expressed, I feel terrified. I have these shakes like you get when you're about to go to the dentist. But there's the other voice too that's grown. You're not going to put up with any unfair. And so there will be resistance still. And that voice is now growing because it's not just me that I'm fighting on behalf of it. I mean, it's about abusive authority. A generalized abstract thing that is present in most authority relationships. Was it Karl Marx or somebody that said, no, it was never mind, it'll come back to me. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. I think it's actually power tends to corrupt. Doesn't have to.
Yeah. Which brings me back to social worker or clinical, professional power. And how do we avoid misusing that?
Absolutely. And you have to be skeptical. Now, this is where you irreverence, which I have had my share of, and have been challenged a lot. People being irreverent with me, I'm glad to say. I think irreverence is often seen by clinicians as something you use on your clients. I think irreverence is primarily to be used on yourself and your institution and your superiors. To be used honorably then I think you have to use at least equally on yourself and your superiors as on the client.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just simply becomes another thing done to people.
Mm.
I'm going to do irreverence. How do you do irreverence? You think,
Yeah.
that's no.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the training and
Yeah.
see what it actually says, which is to not be taken in by the seriousness of a single story.
Mhm. Mm. And how would a client of yours, what would they see that would say, ah, Chris is thinking about power or being, working in a way that isn't misusing power?
I would asking them about their stories, their own stories of oppression and how come. I would be checking whether they're getting what they want from me.
Mhm.
They would probably see me making self-deprecatory jokes about myself and my position,
Mhm.
the uncertainty about whether I'm going to be helpful or not.
Mhm.
And then asking them with irreverence about the question, irreverent questions about themselves.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
there may be other things I do, but that's
Yeah.
probably the.
Yeah. And do you talk about resistance?
Sometimes, yes, I do.
So
Yeah.
how do you do that?
The first thing is I talk about the anger.
Mhm. That's your way into
the anger or the refusing
Mhm.
to do things. And I say, it sounds like you don't want to do ... Or are you telling me that I or somebody else has got it all wrong?
Mm.
Tell us more about that.
Mhm.
That's the first step is to bring forth the story.
Yeah.
Of other people having got stuff wrong.
Mhm.
Or treated you badly or whatever it is. I think not to be shocked by the disrespect of authority, just literally not be shocked when they say, and indeed, if they, I don't think I've ever really felt very angry. I'll be disappointed because there's one emotion that is human that they seem to be denying themselves. I've been encouraging them to talk about unfairness, thinking that suppressing feelings of anger and unfairness is what Karl Marx would have called working class false consciousness. They believe that the people in charge have a right to be in charge rather than are there with permission. And thereafter, I think just privileging stories of objecting, resisting, questioning, identifying what is unfair about the situation, what respect is due and what respect is not. And then think how we're going to do it and bring it into the room.
Yeah. And is that the same when you're working with a family as when you're working with an individual?
Yes. It's more difficult with families because, of course, there's systems of power and respect within the family.
Yeah.
And I tend to talk about how difficult it is to be a parent. I tend to talk about whether parents were respected themselves as children. I very often look back at how they saw their own childhood in terms of their own power, respect, freedoms, and what made them comply. Was that good? And sometimes people complied because it was a good thing to do. They respected their parents. Their parents tended to be right. Damn them. Sometimes they did out of fear.
Mm.
And for some reason, very often their children would rebel and they couldn't find a way of gaining their children's respect because they felt that their control would be abusive. And then we can have a talk about when is control abusive, when is demanding respect unhelpful. How can you put yourself into a position where you can be respected?
Yeah.
And talking with children about what they do like and what they respect, again, bring forth stories. You know, when you're not being angry, what do you think your mum and dad do well? And so on.
Yeah, some different stories.
Different stories, but about respect, about respect is about what you do well. It's not actually simply about your position, but the burden you carry.
Yeah. And what's your intention with those questions?
To bring forth the parents' ability to generate collaboration with their child, because their child sees it's worth doing. So you create a family that collaborates because it makes sense. So it's not compliance. Now I know that sometimes if a child is going to stick a screwdriver into the electric socket, you don't discuss with them collaboration. You grab them. And there are elements of protection, self-protection.
Yeah.
And I'm very much moved by Mona's work on non-violent resistance. Where you can, there's a whole range of things that go with that.
Yeah.
One of which is yourself not putting up with abuse, protecting yourself.
Yeah.
Staying in communication.
Yeah.
Not isolating and pushing away. Not demonizing, not escalating. I've never done an actual non-violent resistance course as per a manual. I've only drawn from the books the ideas. Partly because I'm hopeless at following manuals. And I'm quite good at using ideas.
I wonder if that's a form of resistance as well.
I think it is. Yes, being told what to do and how to do it.
Doesn't fit.
Because actually, I have similar problems with some of the narrative therapies that you go through these different stages of a narrative. You enrich the narrative, you do this and do that. I remember with my bereavement counselling course, you went through these stages of bereavement. I never remember quite what they were, and they never seemed to happen in the right stages. They seemed to chop and change. The bereaved person you had to be with, whatever stage they were in at the time.
Yeah.
You had to recognise it.
Well, that comes back to that witness.
Yeah.
You were talking about, in the woods, as a sort of just being with.
Yeah.
And alongside somebody.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about it now, because I thought that was something that had come to much later in life. But I think witness, see, I didn't experience much witness as a child. I was an isolated child. I don't think any grown up really quite understood what I was about. And I couldn't put it into words. But witness. In fact, the one I had an uncle. He was not very bright. He was an actor. And between the wars, the First World War and the Second World War, he had a good career in the sort of Noel Coward type plays where, you know, a personable young man with a cigarette and a cigarette holder would stand around and look decorative on stage and speak nicely. After the Second World War, when kitchen sink drama and gritty reality came in, he was completely lost. He couldn't do character, he could do acting. And he was not very bright. He was very nice. And I've been taking me out to tea. And the only relative I can remember, he took me out to tea and asked me what I wanted, and did I want more butter and more toast and butter. And he said, I don't know really what to ask you about, because I don't know what you do all the time. What should we talk about? And he absolutely didn't know what he was about. And he was the only decent relative. It stands out, that experience. He's not knowing how to relate to me.
Well, I was just thinking about what you said about not taking a not knowing position, but genuinely not knowing.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like he was very genuine in that.
He was very genuine. And so in that sense, he had an intelligence that transcended his not being very bright, which was a kind of honesty and intelligence. How are we doing with your questions?
I think we're doing well. Do you feel like these are the right questions?
Yeah. I don't know how you're going to turn them into something for a piece of research.
Neither do I. I was hoping that might become more obvious to me as I go along.
Yeah, I think you'd mentioned various kinds of analysis of narratives.
Well,
We did talk about discourse analysis at one point,
yeah.
but whether not sure that's
No, I let go of that. At the moment, I'm thinking some sort of thematic analysis, and from the conversation so far, the kinds of themes that I'm already thinking about, and I'm sure I'll have others that come up when I listen again, is personal experience of powerlessness and feeling powerful, sort of personal and family stories that might inform that and then connect in the work. Something about strategy and effectiveness that I think has come through a few times, and sort of what we might call resistance. You know, you talked about violent resistance versus non-violent, both politically but also interpersonally. And I think there's something in that about what we do. I'm curious whether other people that I speak to will also think about not knowing, or the sorts of positions that the therapist takes.
Yes. And whether when they take a position, they simply it's a stance, or whether it's a genuine position. You know, it's acknowledging where they are, or whether they're pretending to. Of course, if you pretend enough, it becomes second nature. So actually, so maybe taking a not knowing position, or a position of curiosity can become genuine if you do it often enough. Yeah.
I suppose that links to what you're saying about being irreverent about yourself first of all. But if you really cultivate that, you know, you really turn that sort of magnifying glass on yourself, then you might become more genuinely not knowing, because you might be
realize,
able
I didn't realize that.
exactly.
I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah. But I also it sounds like your way into conversations about resistance has been via emotion. Let's think about anger. Let's think about, you know, being treated unfairly and what that's, how that's happened for you. And from reading some of the work of the other people I'm going to talk to, I don't think that's necessarily everybody's way into those conversations. And so I'm interested in, you know, sort of going in via emotion, whereas some of the others, it's much more about action and sort of what did you then do, and focusing on what people have done, and then helping other people to see those actions as a form of resistance that they might not have seen themselves.
I'm wondering about that, or whether the conversation has simply brought forth that answer. Because, of course, my work with children in the care system, in social care or NHS, and in relation to organisations, has always been because there's a problem. And the problem is usually that somebody doesn't do what somebody else wants them to. That's in effect the nature of a problem, I think, is that you can't agree what to do, and the person who defines it as a problem is the one that has the power to do the defining. So when it comes to action, the action it may not be the emotion, maybe it's just asking the person why they did something. And so underlying that would be that the skepticism about the authority. They might not. Why did you do that then? You know, actually could be a question when why did you hit him? Why did you get drunk? Why did you? And hear their story. And then to find out the sense in it. So it's, and the emotion, I guess, would be emerging then from the action. So I'm not sure that it would always be one way, that way, with the emotion first.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think whether there are different contexts. I think when helplessness is the highest context, is apparently the highest context, or the strongest narrative.
Yeah.
Then it can be through the emotion. I mean, it'd be through the action if it's through violence or bad behavior. So if it's depression, it's through the emotion. If it's bad behavior, it's through the action, I think. That's old-fashioned counselling.
Yeah.
You start with the block, you work with the block.
Yeah. And if it's abuse, so if, you know, if the referral is relating to somebody having experienced abuse, would you have ideas there about how you start?
And almost certainly start by saying, we're here because somebody thinks I can be helpful. But I'm not sure what would be helpful for you. So that was always certainly where I start. And I'd be asking a question about what's been helpful in the past and what's been unhelpful so I can avoid doing it. And then saying, if I start to get unhelpful, will you tell me? Because if I am, I want to know as soon as possible. So I feel so wrong. They usually agree, but they wouldn't necessarily do it. But at least the idea that I could be being unhelpful is writ large. I can come back to it. Usually, having done that, it turns out to be helpful simply because we sort of made it safer by talking about it.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound very sort of professional, but sort of safer because we've talked about it.
I think sometimes the simplest.
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. It's about. I don't really believe in complexity.
Yeah.
And you know, I all that cybernetic stuff about epistemologies and levels of context. The labels are unhelpful.
So what do you find helpful? What guides you in the work?
Well, I did learn that stuff.
Yeah.
I learned it pretty thoroughly to master it.
You've explained some of it to me.
Got the CNN stuff. Yeah, which a lot of people find tricky. Actually, it's dead simple. When I say it's dead simple, that is a speed check. Now, of course, that has some power because it makes, if you're finding it complicated or you feel put down by saying it's dead simple, I'm much cleverer than you. So actually, if I kept on saying that things that you find difficult were dead simple,
Yeah.
that would create a relationship that was quite uncomfortable. In fact, it would be a pattern.
Yeah.
And it could only happen in a set context, like when I was set up to be a clever guy, and you're the poor, ignorant learner. Only write self-deprecating jokes, by the way. So we've already got several levels of context built in.
Yeah.
And then we've got people who might be looking in, supervisors and all those people in power and clever people. They're the higher levels of context.
Yeah.
Right up to the government, who's in some kinds of very, very prescriptive in its adoption work. If I was working with you and you'd been adopted, if you let on that being adopted was a major piece of work, I'd say, sorry, I can't work with you anymore. I'm not a registered adoption agency, an adoption support agency. Government would forbid it. Even though I know quite a lot about adoption, and I've worked with a lot of adopted people, the law now, that's a high level of context. That's society and government. And so we have to think that a single speech act between us could come in the context of a whole load of permissions and prohibitions on top.
I'm going to.
No, that is CNN, really.
Yes. But I'm going to bring you back to what guides you.
Sense of justice and watching the family or the other person to see that I'm still in connection.
Is that how you get a sense of your effectiveness?
Yes. And eventually I just say, is it being helpful?
Yeah.
I tend to check reasonably often, I think.
Yeah.
But you could confirm.
Yes, you do. Certainly in our relationship you have done. At least once a conversation.
I mean, if you want to know something, the simplest thing is to ask. And so and if it's not being helpful, what are we bothering with? It's not waste our time. But also if it could be more helpful in a different way.
Yeah.
But I think you're interested in your summary. I'm coming back to that. About whether it was the action or whether it was the emotion. And the answer is I'm not sure now. Whether it was
it's not as simple as
an either or.
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking about is, we've talked theory a bit today. You've brought in theoretical ideas. But I'm wondering in a family therapy session, how much of that we do. And if so, how?
Thank you. Right, that's better. I mean, that's a helpful question. I was in a working group, and somebody said to me, Chris, you simply ooze systemic thinking. Very oozing. But it was interesting.
Yeah.
But actually, my partner comes from a psychoanalytic perspective.
Mhm.
And some of those books there are
Mhm.
psychoanalytic
Yeah.
books. And the psychoanalytic narrative is quite a strong and useful one. I also remember one of my acts of resistance was when I was working in East London in a family therapy, a big family therapy workshop group. We met once a month, and there were about 20 family therapists got together.
Mhm.
And I mentioned the word attachment, and I got shot down in flames. How dare you talk that attachment is all about blaming mothers when children don't do well, and shuts out men, and it's all about pathology with children who have damaged attachments never get better. And yeah, forgive me for opening my mouth. I find that families talk about attachment and use the language very often. So I went away and had a think about this. How can I use it? And of course, one of the founding fathers, elders of family therapy is John Bing Hall, who himself was a pupil of Bowlby. He was an attachment man.
Yeah.
I also did some training on new developments in brain science and imaging, which showed that the brain, the hardwiring of the brain, was affected by early relational experiences, i.e. attachment. And I thought, now that's real social construction. You would actually construct a body, the physical body, through a relationship. That's social construction, isn't it? And in answer to that, I did a workshop for the ACT conference about why family therapists need to think about attachment.
When was that?
1990 something, maybe a bit later, maybe 2000.
Yeah.
And what really terrified me was that one of the participants sitting in the back of the room was John Bing Hall himself. Anyway, he seemed to think quite a bit. Because he didn't know about the brain science because he'd come to it much earlier than that. So I think I added some brain science. And he was generous enough to say that he had learned something from it. But that was an act of resistance in itself. And I think the other reason why we know about attachment is the language that our families use. We're dishonoring them.
It means something to them.
Absolutely. We have to honor their epistemology. Even if we can say, but actually, if we go down the attachment route, look where it takes us. You go with them down the mile down the attachment route and look at the brain science. So now, how do we create different and new brain patterns through relationships, as we do in. Remember Dan Hughes talking about building bonds of relationships and looked after children? No. Okay, never mind.
I don't remember. That doesn't mean it's not where.
It was well. I mean, and basically, he was saying that when you're adopting and fostering, the task is to build a relationship that builds new brain patterns.
Yeah.
Facilitating developmental attachment. This is another book. And that went very closely with the Halimoma stuff about staying in the room, staying in the relationship, not being bullied around, but being yourself in relation to the other person and being present.
Yeah.
So there was attachment theory, there's psychoanalytic theory, and yes, I think I do ooze systemic theory as well. I think I can, but also political theory.
How does that influence your work?
Well, some of the ideas about the dialectic.
Can you say a little more?
Yes, I suppose the thesis is the conventional wisdom. The antithesis is the opposite, the disrespect or the irreverence. And the synthesis is what comes out of the collaboration. So yes, I think Marxist ideas have a lot to offer. Can you ask the question again so I can come back to where we started?
Yeah, I was just, you said that, as well as systemic theory, that political theories influenced you. And I was asking
Right,
how.
cultural action. Cultural action for freedom and pedagogy of the interest. I learned that as part of my social work training, long before family therapy came across it. It was actually about valuing culture that isn't culture with, Royal Opera House or whatever, but culture as it's lived among people in everyday life, into language, and choosing the language of everyday life.
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical of professional ladies, though I can use it brilliantly, I think. I'm ready for facility with professional language. It's probably an act of power on my part. Before that, again, in my social work training, there was a guy called Basil Bernstein who wrote a book and a paper called Class, Codes and Control. And it was about how middle class people received almost by osmosis 2 sets of language. But what was most useful to maintaining their position was the ability to master, and I use the word paternalistically, a language of intellectualism, of saying, well, of course, everybody knows, that claim the right to define, and to use the language of academia to make it look as though what is the view of middle class academics and intellectuals true for everybody.
Yes.
That's an interesting one, actually, because when I left school, I didn't go to university. My wife at that time had been and had got a good degree in archaeology and ancient history. And her family and her best friend's family all hugely prized the erudition of abstruse academics, which I could not join. And then I realized that they were playing a game of their own. self-congratulation about how clever they were,
mm,
as critics tend to do of the arts, and
mm,
all sorts of people do.
mm.
You know, and experts are great at it, and
Yeah.
I learned how to do it.
Mm,
I learned how to become good at it,
yeah,
and to use it when I felt it was helpful
yeah,
to a good cause.
yeah. And it's interesting because you've referred a few times when we've been talking to people who are not very bright, but then which feels like a sort of that same standard being sort of, you know, drawn on in some way. And then you've explained how they did have skills, or there was something, you know, your uncle with his ability to actually be genuine and kind, or, you know, form a connection.
Absolutely.
Or that woman and her sense of, you know, running out a window that she couldn't be followed through.
Absolutely.
Or perhaps stealing the Christmas trees so that she could be in a safe place over Christmas, if that's
absolutely.
because she saw it. You know. So it's,
you see, intelligence is contextual. I suppose I would say that intelligence is not something that resides inside you, but between you and your environment.
mm,
If you can navigate your way through your environment, then that's an intelligence.
Yeah.
If you're just clever enough at doing maths and can't boil an egg,
yeah,
then you can call it intelligence, but
Yeah.
it's decontextualized.
And we've spoken about that before, about young people who are violent and the sort of understanding the sense of their violence, or, you know, what that is communicating, and there's a cleverness in it, even,
Absolutely.
you know, alongside its destructiveness, but you know, appreciating or understanding.
People often dismiss a self-harming attempt, or it's just a cry for help. And what do you mean, just a cry? If it's a cry for help, then they need help. You don't dismiss it because it's a cry for help. You provide help because it's a cry for help.
You respond to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, whenever I hear the word just, you know, you're just saying that, or, you know.
What does that just signal to you?
It's unjust, it's dismissive. It dismisses the narrative, dismisses the importance. It's probably a microaggression. If you use just with somebody, it's almost certainly a microaggression.
Interesting. Something to listen for.
I mean, unjust, in fact.
Yes, yeah. The word, I like that. The word just as a signal for injustice. How has it been having this conversation?
It has made me work quite hard. It's made me, you know, they say the map is not the territory. And you've got an awful lot of bits of territory, but I'd be fascinated to know, and hard to think really, the map that's of me that we've drawn, and when it fits the territory.
I'm wondering if that's about the questions. You know,
Well,
need they be narrower, or is it help? Because you know, I haven't stuck strictly to a.
No, I wonder whether, and the questions about the theory, I think they were very useful, and I think they could be more specific. I think there's theories from within family therapy. There's theories wider in terms of therapy and psychiatry and psychology.
Yeah. And social work,
and social work, and then so then there's political, social and political theory. I think I love those together. So you might want to ask those questions in the stage of 3 or something like that. You know, what from within family therapy And then you said then something about the interplay between them.
Yeah.
And from a CMM perspective, of course, which is the highest context. And for me, of course, the social justice one would be the highest context. So the social and political would be higher than systemic therapy. And I would see whichever model of therapy I chose, it would be serving the higher context.
Yeah.
And maybe talking back at the higher context about justice, about what justice looks like.
Yeah.
So I would lower recursive connection.
That's helpful.
But I think there's three different domains in a sense.
Yeah.
That was good. You could be more specific about the first question. And yes, when did resistance of the idea of resistance first into your life? I mean, it had to be a brilliant idea because I think that's something that we constructed together. But would you want again to ask from examples from different domains? Childhood and family, education and training, professional life. And you have to think whether the other question you're going to be asked about receiving resistance or being resistant against. And you might want to be geared up to be more specific about you might want to say, can you give me an example from your family, an example in relation to your organization, in relation to a client, something like that. That might bring forth a more economical use of time to get to a range of narratives. I don't know. I mean,
I think also there's two questions smushed together there, because there's a sort of tell me about yourself and about when the concept of resistance first came into your life.
I think you can start with the concept of resistance.
But I'm missing actually a sort of who you are, that more general.
But obviously, in a sense, you could go on to the I don't know how you ask somebody who they are.
Well, I
know how do you.
I mean, one thing I'm thinking of is if I'm going to describe you in my research, what do you think is important for me to make note of?
I think you've spotted it, and you've got it there probably. The sense of justice born out of experience of oppression and systems of power doing it, which are related to family and class and religion. A determination to embody justice in life, to see family therapy as a way of achieving that, is shaped by wider narratives of politics, the idea that the personal is political and vice versa. And I've had a great time with lots of nice people who taught me lots of things. So, I mean, the problem is that I have had, like I said at the beginning, 76 years of things happening. There's no way that we can encapsulate that.
No.
And what
No, of course not.
what I would choose
Mm,
to represent that.
yeah,
It would change, of course.
yeah. We're wondering if it's almost oppressive in a way to try.
Yeah.
You know, is
So,
there-
so
there's
actually, maybe the question is, I wonder if there's a, I don't know.
Mm,
If you were to, if you were to ask me to describe myself in terms of the standard categories,
mhm,
yeah, I'm a man,
mhm,
I'm white, I'm old, I'm middle class, upper middle class, primarily mobile,
mhm,
educated to quite a high level,
mhm,
though underachieved probably, don't know what I could have done if I followed somebody else's guidance.
mhm.
I haven't been so fucked up as a kid. So I just think about the categories
Mm, mm.
and
Social graces. Or,
social races,
yeah.
yes, how you describe
Yeah.
yourself in terms of social races.
Mhm,
And how well do you fit those categories?
yeah.
Maybe that would be the thing.
Mhm,
Because you see, I think I'm not very good at being a man
mhm,
in any kind of standard way. I'm quite white, but I think I'm getting more aware of whiteness.
mhm.
I'm very heterosexual. What were the other ones?
Gender, race,
Race, class,
ability.
no disability in there.
Mhm.
I'm not a very good cripple, actually. I'm not the standard one.
What does that mean?
Well, first of all, most wheelchair users have big, strong upper body strength and muscles,
Mhm,
and I've taken to just weak legs and been strong and tough.
mhm,
No,
mhm,
I'm weak all over.
mhm,
I'm not a very grateful cripple. But I don't think I whinge too much either.
I don't know if I'm familiar with the idea of a grateful or an ungrateful. I'm uncomfortable using the word you've used, but
Okay, that's the word, yeah.
yes, but,
I can use it about myself.
exactly.
As black people can use the N word about themselves.
Yeah.
You're quite right. Well, there's an expectation that when somebody does that removes an obstruction,
Mhm.
that you should be glad. When you're crossing the road on the crossing
Mm,
and the car actually stops, that you should thank them.
Mm.
And I do think you should thank anybody. That it's a nice way of encouraging people to do more of the good things.
mm,
But at the same time, I don't think I should have to.
That's that culpable ignorance.
Yes.
You know, there's a sort of, it should be reasonable to expect
Yes.
access, for example.
So so when you ask about am I good as a disabled person,
Mm,
because I wasn't disabled from birth,
mhm,
I didn't realize I was disabled at all. People started making my mobility problems
mm,
my problem. So and one of my most formative experiences of that was actually with Arab
mm,
at the Liverpool conference.
Mm.
And the place was just the place and the attitude and everything was impossible. And just overlooked. And I was at that point not as angry as I think I was entitled to be.
mhm,
And I wrote more in sorrow and anger. And was very gratefully accepted a free place at the next conference. Of course, it wasn't free. I'd already paid for a place at a conference and hadn't had the service. It was simply delivering what I'd paid for. But it was seen as compensation.
Yeah.
And actually, it was simply delivering. And then thinking about that. Yeah, so I don't accept, I'm learning to be not as grateful.
That feels like an act of resistance.
Well, I must say, becoming disabled has taught me a lot about resistance. And in Matt Lucas in
Little Britain.
sorry, Little Britain. When he's in the wheelchair and when he's awfully anxious carer who's always saying, "We don't do this, do we?" We. It's another of those when we hear we, it's like just. We just don't do that, do we? And his act, that Lucas's act of resistance is to get out of his wheelchair, go off, have a good time, dive off the top diving board, dive off, from his off diving, and become helpless again. Which is a bit ironic because it is also suggesting that disabled people are only acting helpless, which is not always the case. But
there's something in that you like.
Something what I like is the resistance. I like the parody of the helper.
Yeah.
Who is happens to be awfully nice. Probably suppressing his own anger. And the language of helping. Is that a language of helping?
Yes. Well, you said becoming disabled taught you a lot about resistance.
Mm.
Can you say more? Give some examples. You've told me to ask for examples.
Okay. Well, clearly at the ALF conference last September, when I asked for reasonable adjustment to be able to participate.
Yeah.
I was told that it was reasonable to be able to talk through a moderator who would collectively gather together the questions of the people who are outside the meeting and represent them to the meeting, to the chair, as participation. The idea that was anywhere near broadly similar, as the Act says, to being present.
Yeah.
And I protested quite strongly, though I was very disappointed when my proxy, who did say, discrimination is happening right this minute. Oh yes, that's noted, and we moved on. And that was another microaggression to dismiss. Yeah. So yes, that's an example. That I'm learning now, and had I not been still involved in a complaint, an unresolved complaint, without I probably made a complaint. Yeah. Another complaint. But I ran out of energy in any case. Yeah. I'm skeptical about October changing. I keep my fingers crossed. Yeah. So it's probably a fight that's hardly worth having.
Well, I mean, making that decision is also an act of self-preservation, which is also a form of resistance, to say, I'm more important than the energy it takes to do that is not a valuable use of me.
Absolutely.
Those are not easy
I mean,
decisions.
what I think is interesting is that on the basis that we might put this up on the website,
Mm,
I was having to be quite thoughtful about how I described it.
yeah, and that's,
Mm,
you know, there are affordances and constraints of being public, and
absolutely.
what's a public conversation and what's not possible to
Mm.
say in a public forum.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And one of my biggest regrets was that in the Liverpool conference, I did not make my concerns about the disability discrimination public,
Mhm.
and thought that it would make things, give people a chance to make things better if I let them
Mm,
make things better.
yeah,
And I think I should have, now with hindsight, yes, described my experience, yes, said this isn't good enough, and yes, put it into context in,
Mhm.
of application, so that the membership knew.
Mm,
I don't think complaints should be kept secret from the membership.
mhm.
The procedure says they're all confidential,
Yeah. You think that should be up to the complainant?
and to be up to the complainant.
Mm.
I waived my rights of
Yeah,
confidentiality in my complaint.
yeah. But it's who's it protecting? That confidentiality.
Well, it had to be it can't be protecting me in that case.
Yes, if if you
And,
want to.
or it must be protecting the institution or the investigators.
Mm, mm.
It might have been protecting somebody else in the chain somewhere as a witness,
Mhm,
another witness,
mhm,
but their protection could easily be managed.
mhm.
It doesn't have to be, you don't say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the fact that I think systemic ethics requires a presumption of openness and transparency in the conversation.
Yeah.
And that unless you have a very good reason not to,
Mm,
then it should be open so that people can know,
yeah.
because of the power of knowledge.
Yeah.
Which comes back to power of freedom and cultural action.
Yes.
Freedom.
Is there anything else you want us to include before we end? Well, if you think of things, you can always tell me afterwards.
Anyway, how has this gone for you?
It's been really interesting to feel that pull between following the threads of a conversation and being, interested or curious or wanting to know more, and then feeling that question or that pull to, am I off on a tangent, or are we off on a tangent? And is this going to help me think about resistance and honouring resistance within the work? So that, it's all relevant if you take a very broad frame, and that tension between the broad and the narrow, I felt.
Yes. I see what you mean, and I think that if I were trying to make sense of listening to me, task which I don't envy you, I think linking the word resistance specifically to the domains of life experience, childhood and family, social and political theory, and I'm not quite sure how. I'm just thinking that yes, very specifically when you ask about what social political theory about resistance. What was your family's attitude to resistance? What was your organization's, the relationship? How was resistance built into the relationship? Because of course, employers have grievance and disciplinary. They have whistleblowing. You and I know that whistleblowers usually get hammered anyway. So actually, whistleblowing policy is not really much use.
I've been a whistleblower once.
And how did it turn out for you?
Not great. I mean, there weren't significant negative consequences for me. It was just utterly ineffective.
Well, that's
It didn't change
what was going on.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So it could have been worse, it could have.
It could have been, they could have hammered you.
Exactly, it didn't. So I wasn't very effective in my whistleblowing, but it didn't.
Well, I think that's interesting, actually. I mean, that
It didn't have the desired effect. It just continued. Yeah. But I've also had moments where I've thought about it and not for exactly the reasons you're describing. That sort of awareness of the context, the likely outcomes, and made a decision that that's not going to help.
you're linking directly
Yeah.
the domains to the resistances.
Yeah.
In some way.
Yeah. Did you feel that I sufficiently brought you back to practice?
I think so, yes, you did, yeah.
Because that's, I've kind of come in with this intention of wanting to learn about practice and how these ideas.
It'll be much easier to answer had I been currently in practice, not been retired for so long.
Yeah.
So I hope that the people who are interviewing,
You're in the middle of it.
in the middle of it.
Yeah.
There's not a question of what did you do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that changes it.
I've been retired for 10 years. So I'm really, really out of date, and
Not with theory or not.
I'm sure there's more and more recent stuff. Anyway.
Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome. I hope it'll be useful.
I'm already looking forward to listening to it again. I think there's always different ideas.
And so I'd be interested to know how you
make sense
inside of it. Yes.
Well, you've given me some ideas of how to make sense from your perspective.
And each person will do the same because they'll reflect on their own.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I've been as coherent. I think some of your other people will give you a much more, what's the word, manageable account.
Well, I think you've spoken about your resistance to manualized therapy.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether it's broader than that. And so the sort of categorization that research demands or asks of us, you're not totally comfortable with that, perhaps. And so the idea that we'd have this conversation, which has been broad and interesting and challenging and stretching, and then that I'm going to have to sit and impose some sort of.
Yeah, I'm worried about you having to do that. Because I know that I haven't been compliant in terms of doing it. But maybe I didn't need to be. I mean,
Well, that's interesting. What's the pressure on a participant to be a good participant and give me answers that can then neatly be categorized, whether or not that's a reflection of.
Well, again, it's easy to draw a map, but it may be no better representation of territory.
Yeah.
And that would be an interesting question for each of the other interviewees.
Yeah. How well has our conversation reflected
who you think you are?
Yeah. Who you think you are and what you think your practice is. I'll keep that one.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I'm sorry you didn't know this yet, and you didn't.
Oh, I'll take one for the road.
Okay.